So I built this table out of scaffold boards for basically nothing. Here is how I did it. So we moved into this house just before Christmas 2019, and we had a few people coming around for Christmas Day, and I realised that we didn't have a table big enough to seat everyone around, which is a bit of an issue. I used to work on Tottenham Court Road, and we had like Habitat, Heels, West Elm, like really premium, expensive, nice furniture shops nearby. So I went and had a walk around by lunchtime, and it turns out if you want to buy a table off the shelf, not cheap, like thousands and thousands of pounds for something this big. So I really needed to find a plan B pretty damn quick. A bit of Google, a bit of YouTube later, turns out this was what I was looking for, scaffold boards. So some people make some brilliant bits of furniture out of scaffold boards. They look really smart and it's incredibly cheap. All you need to build a table like this is literally scaffold boards, something to make some table legs out of, and a way of attaching them, i.e. screws. That's it. So here's the process. Now I'm recording this 14 months after I built it. I didn't record any video at the time, annoyingly, but I did take some photos. So what I'll do is I'll intersperse some pictures just for visual references of how it looked at whatever stage of the process I'm talking about at the time. But yeah, it's pretty simple, so you shouldn't have to leave too much to the imagination. It's 5 planks of wood and some screws. So the main thing you need, obviously, is the scaffold boards themselves. Now I actually paid money for these, which turns out I didn't need to do. I got them from a reclamation yard. They're second-hand but decent condition boards. But I've subsequently learnt this year that there's loads of scaffolding companies looking to give away for free pretty much all the time. So if you just spend a bit of time on Facebook Marketplace, you should be able to find some near to you. Go pick them up, and there you've got your building blocks for free. Now when you go and pick up your boards, you're going to want to know how many you need for your table. And I had no idea quite how big or wide or anything I should make my table. And this handy little diagram I found online is really useful. It basically shows you how much room you'll need around your table within your room. So I think this room's like 5 meters long, 3 and a bit meters wide. So you bash those dimensions in and it tells you what table you can fit into that space. And it accounts for like cabinets around the edge, the space you need to open a door, the space you need to walk behind people if they pull their chair out, that sort of thing. And it'll tell you how many people you can fit around the table as well, so you'll have an idea on sort of minimum, maximum capacity. You can obviously add a couple more on because you can usually squeeze people in if you have to. But a really good starting point is that. Then once you know how many boards you need, you can then get yourself on Facebook Marketplace and try and hunt them down. Once you've picked up your boards, you're going to want to leave them to acclimatise for a bit of time, ideally in the room that you're going to make the table in and that the table will live in. That's because when they go from a warm to a cold, from a damp to a moist to a dry, whatever environment, they change shape slightly, they'll warp a little bit, they'll expand, they'll contract. And if you get them used to the temperature and the sort of humidity of the room that they'll be in, then they'll be at that sort of constant size and shape when you get around to building the table. So I think I actually only left these in here for a couple of weeks before I built the table, but I think people recommend maybe 6 weeks. I'm not sure if that's totally necessary, but yeah, 2 weeks has been fine for this one. And it's worth bearing in mind, the building process only takes a day or two, so if you can spare the time to let them rest in that room for a few weeks, it's not going to hamper your ability to build the table in time at the end, hopefully. Touch wood. So at this stage, assuming they're all the right length, if you've either got someone to cut them for you or you've cut them yourself, so they're all the same length, I just gave them a quick sand with some coarse sandpaper just to get them sort of a bit smooth, remove the worst of the sort of blemishes from their previous life on a building site. For that, I bought an orbital sander, so it's about 30 quid from B&Q. I'll stick a picture of it here. Dead easy to use, it's been fine since then. No regrets on buying a cheap one. Get some coarse sandpaper like a 40 or an 80, and then some finer sandpaper like a P180, 220, that sort of thing. All you've got to do at this stage is a rough grind with some coarse sandpapers like P40 up and down a few times with the sander, smooths it off, gets it ready, and removes the worst of anything. If there's any sort of bits of wood which you might get splinters off. It just removes that, so it makes the next part of the process a little bit easier. So your planks are all sanded down. That means you're ready to attach them to one another. Now this is actually something I'd probably do differently now than I did at the time, only that I think I just overcomplicated it. I actually went and put glue all the way up along the joins, squeezed them together and then screwed it in. I don't actually think the gluing is that necessary. I don't also think that you need to worry about things like biscuit joints and doweling. That was something I was considering back then, but I thought too expensive just to buy a biscuit jointer for one job. I didn't really know how to do it and it'd probably go wrong, so I didn't bother with that. But yeah, I think just screwing it into battens which run underneath the table is more than enough support than you'll need. So with these on the floor, so the table's basically upside down, I just put the battens across roughly, screw them in on one side, and then if you just pull the scaffold board in either with a squeezy clamp or by hand and pull it in really tight so the planks are nice and snug against each other, obviously at the same length at each end, just screw it into the batten underneath, that's not going to move anywhere. It's not going to go sideways, it can't really move. So I think that's a good solution and it's dead easy, dead quick. You just need, I don't know, 1 batten per metre. I've got 4 under there. I could probably get away with 3. Screw, 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 times 4. It's like 20 screws and the whole thing is attached. Nice and solid, nice and flat, really easy. And you can actually use a scaffold board underneath as the batten as well if you had like offcuts from the end. They're perfectly thick and strong enough to do that job. So that then leaves you with your tabletop effectively. It's obviously in its unrefined state, but it's in a state where you could move it around, lift it, store it, take it indoors, take it outdoors, whatever you need to do with it. And yeah, it's ready for the next stage. So once you get your tabletop ready, at this stage I recommend putting your legs on, primarily just because it makes it easier to work on the tabletop if you've got legs on it. Now I got these which are, I think they're like called pin needle or needle legs or something. At the time on Amazon they were like 40 quid. Now they're about 80 quid, so that's not quite the bargain that they used to be. You can probably pick up something cheap off a reclamation yard, keep an eye on eBay, Facebook Marketplace, that kind of thing. They don't have to be table legs technically. Anything that's like strong in the right height and can be screwed into a wood, into the tabletop is fine. So keep an eye out. You can maybe get creative, use something else, but once you've got your legs on, screw them in, flip your table over, and you're halfway there. So the next thing I did was get some wood filler. So I bought some, I think it was light pine it was called, which matched the colour of the scaffold boards. I filled in some of the holes and cracks. So because they are used scaffold boards, there's a few dinks and dents in the wood from various things, which some are quite nice to leave in and some would look better with them filled in. So I filled those in with the filler. I also put a line of it down the joins between each plank because there's a little valley, because they don't have square edges, there's little sort of rounded corners. So I filled those in as well, just to give a nice smooth tabletop. Now the filler comes out bright orange, which was a bit alarming to be honest with you, because it didn't match the wood, but once you sand it down it became the right colour, so that's all good. And yeah, that just meant it was sort of smooth, even, looking smart, ready for the next step. So once it's got the smooth surface, then sanded the whole thing down with some more fine sandpaper. So I think I used P180 or P220 at this stage, and that left it really smooth. Like the coarse sanding 40 or 80 leaves it pretty smooth, but turns out 180, 220 leaves it like a sheet of ice kind of smooth. It's really nice finish. The whole thing, do the corners and the edges and that sort of thing, so you don't have to worry about getting anything caught on the edges of your table. Once you've done that, it's just one stage to go really, and that is wax or oil. At the time, I put a layer of wax on. That's because I went to B&Q and it seemed like the best option of what they had. It looked fine. You kind of put it on with a brush and then buff it off. I used a microfiber cloth and spent probably half an hour doing it, and it looked pretty good. It's quite a bit shinier than I thought, a bit darker than I thought, but it's fine. You could still see the grain of the wood through it, which is all I really wanted at that stage. And that was about 3 days before Christmas, so job done, ready to go, get the family round. And that all went well, apart from the fact that halfway through dinner I realised that I hadn't buffed the wax off enough. Everyone was sitting there having a chat, and then someone put their arm up above their head and they had a giant brown patch on their elbow. And I was like, oh no! And yeah, it's because I hadn't buffed the wax off properly, so it turns out everyone had brown patches on their elbows, so don't do that unless you want some slightly miffed guests. Yeah, not the end of the world. But yeah, buff it off properly. I actually got an orbital sort of air-powered thing which runs off an air hose from my workshop, which had a sheepskin on it, and it's the sort of thing used for polishing cars and things like that, and that got rid of the wax really nicely and it left it in this colour that it is now. But if I was to do this again, I would just use oil, Danish oil, Osmo oil, something like that. I've used it on a few different bits of scaffold board and it looks great. It's really easy to apply, it just soaks into the wood, leaves it a nice colour where you can still see the grain. I think you can get pigmented oil as well if you want to make it a bit darker. But yeah, that's all you need. Nice layer of Danish oil on top, couple of coats of that, and it's job done, and you don't have to worry about the quality of your ability to buff the wax off, which turns out is a bit of a factor. So there you go. It's as easy as that. If I can do it, anyone can do it. You need minimal tools, minimal skills. It's literally just a drill to put some screws in. The orbital sander will help you, but you don't even really need that. And yeah, some boards and some legs, and it's simple, it's fun, and if it all goes completely wrong, which I don't really see how it can, it's only cost you like 50 quid or something, so it's not the end of the world. Now, if you're watching this, you're probably doing it on my blog site, which is normally about bicycles and like places I've ridden them, things like that. Not necessarily that interesting to everybody, but it's just a sort of personal account of things I do. But I also wrote about this table, and I wasn't really expecting much from that, but it turns out to be a lot more popular than anything related to bicycles on there. So there's like 200, 250 people a day read this blog post, which is kind of mind-blowing and slightly unplanned. And I feel like almost in a position of responsibility, because I'm now like the #1 on Google for how to build scaffold board dining tables, which is quite funny given how inept I am at generally doing woodwork. But I don't know, people seem to quite like learning from people who have as little idea as they do themselves sometimes, and you really can't go that badly wrong. But yeah, give me a shout if you've got any questions. I know loads of people have already built tables. I've seen loads of pictures from people all around the world actually who've read this article and have built some furniture, so that's pretty cool. And yeah, I've done a few other things. I've done some other stuff with scaffold boards. I've also built a shed out of pallets, which is outdoors, and I need to do a video about as well, so there'll be a bit of content on that to come. But yeah, if you're thinking about it, do it, and don't give furniture shops thousands of pounds for something which you can do for yourself in a day, and spend the money on a holiday or something when we're allowed to go on holiday, because that'll be fun if we're ever allowed to leave the country again. Yeah, right, there you go.